So on Sunday, I made some pretty bold claims. Talked about systematic theology, which probably most or none of you knew anything about, still don't really, except for my word on it. And I talked about the state of things in especially the denominational churches. Pretty bold claims. And my problem is that I need to follow up on it, but I don't want to step into the shoes of the people who point at this one and say, that's a false teacher, that's a false teacher. Don't listen to them, listen to me. I don't want you just taking my word for things. But there are some fundamentals. There are some things I think we can start with. One of which is that our religion, our faith, is based on the belief, the assurance that Jesus, the Messiah, was God incarnate. He was the very Son of God, but he was God in the form of man, here for our redemption, our atonement. Without that, what are we? We're a social club with a kind of a common philosophy of do good. We went to a church in San Antonio where the person in charge of youth Sunday school scoffed at the idea that Jesus was divine. And we said, well, we think that's sort of fundamental, don't you? And they really didn't. That, more than anything else, is a problem. If we reach a point that we don't believe that much, we have nothing. We have nothing to talk about. And really, you gotta ask yourself, why are we here? The other thing I want to propose to you is that there are certain things that are related in such a way that you can't believe in one without believing in the other, and you can't disbelieve one without disbelieving the other. And I'll give you just an easy example. If I tell you that I'm Howard Hughes's illegitimate son, you can believe me, you think I look like an honest guy, or you can think that I'm in it for notoriety and money. But if you disbelieve that I'm Howard Hughes's love child, you can't believe that my daughter Julie is Howard Hughes's granddaughter. I know, through the mother's side, you know what I'm saying. You can't disbelieve me and still believe her. Just doesn't work. And there are things like that. There are fundamentals that are like that. The book of Daniel is pivotal in our faith, in our Bible. It's studied extensively in seminaries because it has to be. Most now teach it as historical fiction. And you'll just have to take my word on it, or we'll have to agree to get together and, I'll make a presentation. But the problem with that is, they say that Daniel was written actually hundreds of years after it claimed to be, after things had already unfolded, and now all they're doing is using what they know and presenting it as prophecy to teach some lesson. But we see in Matthew and in Mark direct quotes of Daniel. Luke has a reference that's almost a direct quote, but it's the same thing. So 3 of the 4 Gospels account of Jesus teaching Daniel as if it's truth. And one of the comments in there, he teaches as prophecy of something that's going to happen later, after he's gone. Now, if the original work is an allegory, and that's essentially, it's a fake, it's a story. And since it purports to be prophecy, it's a lie. It's a cleverly crafted lie. If that's a lie, and Jesus was fooled by it, he was taken in by this clever lie, and then himself teaches it as if it's prophecy and truth, then he's not who he said he was. He's not God incarnate. He's a man who was taken in by a, pretty simple ruse. And so whether you want to or not, you're faced with this sort of, dilemma. It's one way or the other. If you're going to claim to believe, to accept that Jesus was and is who he claimed, then you have to go back to Daniel and say, wow, this really was prophecy. This really was truth. And it's a bright line. It's a dividing line. And I'm not going to spend, an hour going into details. You're going to have to either trust me or not on some of this. But I've spent a lot of time looking at what's being taught in seminaries. Just a couple of days ago, to prepare for this, I went out and looked up some references from seminary professors, one seminary president, seminary students, and then other, well-known Bible scholars, where they refer to Jesus as an anointed one. Now, I've told you that Messiah, the word Mashiach, means anointed. It is anointed one. And it is very clearly the anointed one. But they refer to him as an anointed one. And it's not an accident. That's not a slip. No one makes that particular mistake, just, accidentally calls him an anointed one. But a couple of them, several really, go so far as to compare Jesus to other anointed ones. Like one is a guy named Onias III, who was a high priest in Jerusalem, happened to be the high priest when those Seleucids we talked about came in and took over. And it was he's basically one of those guys that was so corrupt that really didn't believe anything, and he got put down, and his brother then got put in. I told you that story. And they talk about Jesus being an anointed one in exactly the same way that Onias, and they say that Onias was another anointed one. They talk about them as like two flavors of the same kind of ice cream. And those tell us what this person believes. That people, the indication is that some people might have thought that Onias was going to be a Messiah, an anointed one, but circumstances didn't work well for him. And it looked like they didn't work well for Jesus, but then after his death, some things caught on. This is directly out of the seminaries. It's directly in the seminaries. And it's widespread. It's wide, it's deep. It's not universal, but it's much closer to it than most of you would like to believe. Now, I've never felt like I'm in the position to tell anyone, this is what you have to believe. Not my place. I try to teach, I try to bring some facts, but to tell you what to do, I can't force my belief on you, and I can't hand off my faith to you. But I can tell you what's there a lot of the time, some of the time, in the scriptures, and I can show you the things that are consistent and the reason why I think they're worth believing, why I think they're true. But I can tell you that when a person who has been trained in a seminary, and they go through a lot of training, and when they do things like compare Jesus to Onias and call them each an anointed one, they don't believe that there's an underlying truth. And when they say that they believe that Daniel was written long after the fact, and that it's simply an allegory to teach a noble lesson, they know, they've been trained too well. They know that Jesus presented Daniel as, like gospel, I guess, as truth, as prophecy. And they know the implication. And that's why a lot of them don't teach these lessons, because they've actually, in a lot of cases, been taught not to confront people with these sorts of things, because you'll have to have the frank discussion that this is all just philosophy. And I know that may be hard for some of you to believe, but the last generation, maybe my age, it was prevalent. In the new generation, it's almost exclusively social justice and just good acts. Just do some good things. The problem for us, some of you are probably thinking, well, I don't know about any of that, but I believe. And it doesn't matter what that person believes, I believe. And that's true. But when our teachers don't believe, they inject things week after week that weaken us. And we're left with doubts and we're left hollow. And when we need our faith the most, often it's empty. Every bit as bad, though, is that approach robs us of this element that they refer to as mysticism, supernatural, which just means above the natural, but they treat it like it's something less. Systematic theology is about science, about making God conform to science. And if we chop everything up in little bits and measure it and name it, then we can create rules, and it always behaves this way. And so here's the thing. Science does not create rules. A lot of people believe it does. Science is a method of study. It's a method of studying the world around us, of studying nature, if you will. And when you're dealing with something that is supernatural, it is not what we consider nature. How can you apply science rules to something that doesn't conform? In fact, God made whatever rules exist, and we study them, and we try to manipulate them, we try to contain them, use them to our benefit. And if we try to apply the laws of nature, by definition, we have to eliminate that which is supernatural. And by teaching us this way, what the seminaries and the pulpits and the denominations have done is to rob us of one whole side of the faith, of the belief, of the God that we should have. And what we read to you on Sunday, that story that Daniel relates, is impossible through the scientific method, and it's impossible in most of our seminaries. And they say because it's not tangible, we discount it. We say, well, maybe there's something good to be learned, but we don't really believe that it's true, that it's literal. God is clearly, to us at least, spirit, not something subject to the scientific method, not something subject to experiment, and should not be. Logically, this is where we really lose it, is where is the logic? How can we presume to think that a method of experimentation will subject God to our whims and to our reason? You can't have it both ways. And they start with an answer and work backwards to the evidence or the lack of. And you're all welcome, any of you, all of you are welcome to believe that way. What I'm trying to present, what we're trying to present, is something that very likely has not been presented to you before. You might hear or read some of this and think, well, maybe I think this or that. But the truth is, there are a lot of things laid out in there for a reason. And they're unambiguous. And they're there to assure us. I don't want to be a person who says, that's a false teacher, that's a false teacher. I don't. I want to try and present you with the few things that I feel comfortable saying, this is truth. This is a thing you can stand on with confidence. And if that challenges some of the other things you've been taught, then you have a decision to make. You have to look at it and say, I can't leave room for anything supernatural. In the seminaries, by the way, they refer to that as mysticism. The people who kind of lean that way have given themselves over to mysticism, and it's not a compliment. And if you believe that way, they just smile and they sort of look at you as a rube, and you don't understand science. Sooner or later, faith is a decision. But the things I'm telling you do present you with an absolute decision. I believe one way or I believe the other. Either these things are true, or Jesus is not really who we say he is, who he said he is. He was a man, a good man with some good teachings, and it makes us all behave nicer if we take it to heart. It's two ways of seeing the world and two ways of seeing eternity. At the very least, I hope none of you go away feeling like what I did was to throw rocks at any individual or any of you for that matter. It was all about presenting what's in there and making you understand the implications, the longer run implications for rejecting certain things. I hope that helps. I hope we see you soon. I decided, since I've got you here, for those of you who actually made it to the end, there's one more thing I probably need to say. I jumped off into the world of politics. I've got all this wonderful equipment and decided I was going to use it to set some things right. I look around, see things that are, in my opinion, not right. And through the power of technology and my biting wit, I guess, I was going to straighten things out. And, Jesus came and didn't straighten those things out. He says he will when he comes back. But until then, they kept going, but somehow I must have thought I was going to do what he couldn't do through the miracles of modern technology. Not consciously anyway, but that's the net effect of it. And I stayed angry a lot. When you get into the world of politics, you see a lot of things that make you angry, and that's why people behave the way they do. That's why the headlines look like they do. And it was, it was a mistake. And then I got a following. I got people who subscribe. They say, we watch every one of these. Please don't quit. And there's my ego properly stoked. That should always be a warning sign. And even when I suspected that maybe I had stepped into a world where I don't really belong, and kind of did from the start, but it began to occur to me that I'm saying a lot of things with wit and sarcasm that they're not very nice, because that's the way politics are done. But there's this part of me that says, but now, you're obligated to see this through. You've started some things and people depend on you, and you've got to keep with it. No, I really, really don't. It was a mistake. I wound up neglecting some things that I shouldn't have in favor of some things that, like I said, they're not my world. And, I look at what's happened since this flood. Maybe it was just the amount of wake up call that I needed, in which case, I guess overall it's a good thing. And there's the last thing I want. Well, the point of that is some of you are undoubtedly aware that it's, I've been involved in just not a very nice world. And even though some of the stuff may be funny, it's also kind of mean, and that's over with. I'll mention about this flood. I told you that the ditch got cut and they piled dirt up and turned the front yard into a bowl. It was the state and not the county, and the state used a contractor, and I could go sue them. The guy who was supposed to get flood insurance just fell down on the job. He was supposed to have gotten it done, and he didn't. There was a roadblock of some kind, or a bump in the road, and he just never got around to it. He's the guy I went to high school with, and overall, he's a good guy. I could sue him, and it appears that maybe this house flooded once before. They failed to disclose it, and I could go track down the elderly woman who sold it to us and maybe the listing agent and sue them. And it's all just, it's part of that same dark, mean world. I can't say that the thought of opening up the checkbook for all that has to be done is appealing, but I think that other doesn't look very good. And I think, look at another year of being angry and fighting, and it just doesn't seem very consistent. So I don't know how this will play out, but what I can tell you is we're okay. This place is okay. The message that we teach, the class, the people in it have been fantastic, and it's okay. And that's really what this was about to begin with. That's why we did it. So for all practical purposes, the important things haven't changed. And wanted to give you that assurance that it's not just the building, we're okay. And thanks for being there.